Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today.
Good evening, everyone. You're in the right place at the right time. This is Coast to Coast AM, blasting out of the Mojave Desert like a Scirocco, blazing across the land, slamming into your radio like a supercharged nanoparticle of unobtainium. Greetings from the boldest, bawdiest, most outrageous city in the world, the planetary capital of sun, fun, sin, sex, and secrets, my not-so-humbled hometown, Las Vegas, Nevada. My name is George Knapp, your occasional host, designated driver of the airwaves, and moderator of tonight's upcoming cacophonous cavalcade of conversation. What's shaking out there? You know, I say this every year right about this time. If you ever have a hankering to come to Las Vegas, this is the time of the year to do it. Late September, the entire month of October. It's far and away the nicest time of the year here in the desert. The days are sunny in the 70s or maybe into the 80s, and it's still warm enough for hanging out at the pool. The nights and the mornings are just sublime. They're cool and balmy. Feels like you're on Kauai, only, not quite as green, obviously. So, break open the piggy bank, borrow some dough if you need to get here, because it's really nice here right now. All eyes on NASA. Hours from now, they're launching an experimental craft tomorrow that is designed to crash, to smash right into an asteroid, an unsuspecting asteroid that's way, way out there in space, millions of miles from now, here, the Earth, about to get pummeled if all goes well. This experiment is to see if we can destroy or deflect an asteroid or other space rock that's determined to be on a collision course with Earth. I mean, that day will come one of these days, as we've all learned, and barring a mass desire to follow the dinosaurs into oblivion, this kind of technology would be a good one to get right. We certainly can't count on some other country to get the job done, so go NASA. Tonight, we take a deep dive into what seems like a threat, an intruder that might be lurking way out there in space or originally came from way out there somewhere. This, whatever it is, has shown an intense, ongoing, hands-on interest in we humans. And maybe it's about our survival. Maybe it's about their survival, whoever they might be. Here we are, years into the great UFO resurgence, 5 years, the 5th year of the UFO UAP hoopla, wherein the public is energized and interested. Major media have been paying attention, writing articles, airing stories, digging for facts. Finally, Congress asking tough questions about this age-old mystery about what's flying around in the skies and what the Pentagon might know. And I've noticed that nearly all of the focus is on secrets. Secrets government programs, secret UFO files, secret military videos that we aren't allowed to see about who the secret keepers are, what they know, why they won't tell the rest of us, crash retrievals, reverse engineering, nuts and bolts flying saucer tech stuff, all of that debated so ferociously on Twitter and other social media and in the halls of power in D.C. and other world capitals. And I'm certainly glad to see all this. But with all of this attention focused on those aspects of the mystery, so much else has been kind of pushed to the side, ignored, overlooked. And I'm speaking mainly about the people who say they've met these visitors, these others, whoever they are, wherever they're from, met them, and in many cases met them up close and personal many times over the course of their lifetime. We used to call them alien abductees. That was the term that was used. More recently, the term is experiencers. That's the preferred description. There are probably millions of people around the world who have had these experiences. Many of them may not even know it or may not realize it or don't want to confront it. You know the classic signs, the missing time, the scoop marks, the nosebleeds, sometimes almost comical situations where they wake up outside their homes locked out, or they wake up inside their homes with their clothes or pajamas are on backwards or inside out. The experiencers say they're taken, often from an early age, throughout their lifetimes, for reasons that are not entirely clear. These are folks who would seem to know a lot more than the rest of us about who these visitors are, these others, assuming they're not visitors, and what they've got in mind for us, what the plan is long term. At least for the time being, the experiencers are taking a back seat, though, to anyone who has a tidbit of information about government programs or files or videos or secrets. I thought maybe for one night we could take a return trip to the core of the various mysteries, what they've learned from them, the others, according to humans who know them best. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get to know two women who say they've had lifetimes of unusual, frightening experiences taken against their will by strange beings for reasons that are not entirely clear, but there are clues and signs and hints the experiencers have accumulated about what's going on, and that's what we're going to hear. Then in the human aspects of the UFO mystery. You've not heard their stories before. They are not published authors. They haven't spoken publicly about their experiences. They don't do interviews, but I know you're going to learn plenty from them, as I will. Allison and Lauren join us momentarily, and we'll save some time for you to ask some questions, maybe compare notes with them if you, too, have had these kinds of experiences yourself. And I was thinking about this program, who else should be part of it? I got an email kind of out of the blue from a friend of mine, Robert Hastings. You know him for his groundbreaking work. He wrote a book called UFOs and Nukes, also produced a documentary with that same topic and title about UFO intrusions at sensitive military bases, nuclear bases around our country, around North America, around the world. Some of you might remember that after a career of really distinguished investigations and writings, Robert Hastings admitted on the air on this program for the first time that he was an experiencer, and that his research was in part motivated by his own lifetime of strange contacts. That was quite a moment for our show. And for Robert, you know, he's one of the people I most respect and trust in this field, and he's a friend. And, well, he reached out on the same day I was putting the show together, out of the blue, like I said, with an email about a friend of his who'd likewise had a lifetime of dramatic close encounters and who'd just written a new book about it, published in the UK. Nice coincidence for me, if that's what it is. Out of Time is the name of the book. Steve Alpin is the guy who wrote it, and it's good. Steve Alpin joins us in the second half tonight, and I know you're going to be intrigued by the astonishing tale that he has to share with us. That's our plan for tonight. Webmaster Ryan Stacy and I have put together our usual assortment of items and oddities culled from various news sources around the world. We call it Knapp's News. You can find it on the Coast to Coast AM website. Among the stories there tonight, I mentioned about this weird new logo announced and released by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. They have an aviation office, a sub-office within that intelligence operation, and its new logo shows different advanced aircraft flying over North America, including, ta-da, a classic UFO. Looks like the Bob Lazar sport model. So what is the intelligence community telling us here? Or are they merely yanking our chain, messing with our heads? If so, it worked, because UFO social media over this weekend has been a buzz about what, if anything, this new logo might mean. Check it out. If you haven't seen it yet, take a look. We've got a link on the Coast to Coast website in Knapp's News. Also, there an article about the Pentagon's purchase of this massive database, browsing history, social media stuff. What the heck is up with that? Those stories and more in Knapp's News. And while you're on the website, check out how to become a Coast Insider. The cost is about 15 cents a day. If you subscribe for a year, gives you access to a vast archive of programs and interviews, including the Art Bell Vault. You can listen anytime you want, as often as you want. It's a great deal. So, too, is Beyond Belief. That's the TV show hosted by George Norrie, where George interviews great guests on scintillating topics, similar to what he does here on the radio. You can subscribe to that as well. With that, let's assume the position. Bring in the dog and the cat and the koala. Put on a pot of joe. Slide your bod into those silky autumn jammies and your best bunny slippers. Plop yourself down in a comfy spot. Turn down the lights and turn up the radio, because we're about ready to rumble in a moment. Two lifelong experiencers, Allison and Lauren, share their sometimes terrifying tales of close encounters. I'm George Knapp, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Listeners of this program know a lot of the history of what used to be called alien abductions. There was the Betty and Barney Hill case from 1966, Betty Andreessen, Travis Walton, a few other isolated cases, at least isolated we thought. Then along came Bud Hopkins with his monumental book, Missing Time. And after that, an even bigger blockbuster, Communion, by Whitley Strieber, who connected with millions of people around the world. That thin alien face staring out from the cover of the book touched a nerve around the globe. For a while, alien abductions became kind of a hot topic for UFO organizations, if reluctantly that is. They were featured in UFO conferences. They still are, to some extent. Papers were written. People were interviewed on television. Hucksters got involved, of course. Spielberg put out this monumental series called Taken. If you haven't seen it, you should check that out. The general story about alien abductions became fairly well known, but as the subject became a little more acceptable, at least to talk about, or at least not as outrageous as it once seemed, there was significant pushback for the experiencers. They still mostly don't want to come out of the closet, so they don't tell their families. They don't tell their spouses, their friends. They certainly not their coworkers because they worry how that's going to be viewed. Tonight we return to that core mystery. What is happening? Did abductions suddenly stop, or does it just seem that way? My guests have both had numerous close encounters, up close and personal. That includes missing time and face-to-face meetings with strange beings, experiences that you might call paranormal more than alien. It also gets a little weird here and there. Allison and Lauren agreed to be here to share their stories and answer some questions. Allison prefers that her last name not be used. Lauren's name is Lauren Nalder, and I'll let them tell you about their lives, their backgrounds, how it all began. Allie and Lauren, welcome to Coast to Coast.
Thank you. Thanks, George. Thanks for having me.
Allison, I'm going to start with you because you and I met before years ago. It was a story that I was pursuing that has nothing to do with this topic, little to do with it anyway. And I won't get into specifics of what that story was because it would certainly identify you and your sisters. But your story about your sisters, even without abductions, would be pretty astonishing. Can you tell our listeners about you, your two sisters, how the three of you ended up in exotic places, including an island in the Pacific Ocean?
Okay, so we were adopted, and our parents lived overseas, and so we got to live where there was primarily oil and then some military posts out in the Middle East and so Saudi Arabia, which was very cool. We lived there twice. And then we also lived on Kwajalein Atoll, which is halfway between Australia and Hawaii during the 1970s. And we lived in Germany. And then back to the United States. So my parents wanted us to have this American experience, and we ended up moving back here.
I was just thinking the astonishing part is that the three sisters are all adopted by the same family, that you weren't split up, that you were able to stay together.
That's true, and I feel really fortunate for that because we had a lot of really good experiences, and we also had shared experiences also.
So you're on this atoll, ages 3 to 9. That's when things start happening for you. How does it manifest itself? What are you seeing at this young age?
So we began by having poltergeist experiences in our house. I remember that our closet was especially terrifying. And we didn't talk about it till we were in our 20s. And we finally did talk about it, and we all realized that we were having the same experiences. It was terrifying. It was terrifying outside. And you have to understand that where we lived was a big World War II battlefield in the Pacific Ocean. And I'm not sure if that played into it, but we sensed many kind of negative entities that we didn't tell our parents about, because we didn't feel we could tell them.
You said that you were experiencing what you called poltergeist stuff, and you didn't talk about it till later. All three of the sisters are basically seeing weird stuff. Why did you think of it as poltergeist-type activity?
That's a great question. It was negative. It was negative. It was scary. There was nothing positive about any of those experiences. And it wasn't just at night. It was during the day. It was if one of us was back there in the room. And it didn't seem to be anywhere else in the house.
You had shared with me a story about remembering, this is an early memory, about something that lifts off a glass table or something like that, or a dining table that you saw?
That's right. That's right. So I was in the living room at the dining table, and I noticed that back then we played with marbles, and one of the marbles had lifted up off the table about 6 inches. And then I watched it, and then it slowly moved over onto the ground, very, very slowly. And I walked around it 3 times before it finally got to the ground. And I remember thinking, even as a little kid, there's something wrong with this. I don't know what it is, but this is not normal.
Are you
Not normal
seeing
at all.
Are you seeing lights in the sky? Are you seeing alien type beings?
So outside of our house, I would meet up with this little bald man, and he was about my height, and he was really super nice, and he had these little cat-like animals with him, and I think they were there to make me feel comfortable. And he was just really nice, and he would talk to me. I don't remember anything he said, but that was not normal either.
So you and your two sisters, as close as people can be. You travel together. You're adopted together. You're living together in this far off place. You're all having these similar experiences, but even as close as you are, you're not sharing it with each other, let alone your parents.
That's correct. And it just wasn't until much later when we couldn't ignore all of these experiences collectively together, because those collective experiences didn't just happen on this island. It happened throughout our lives.
We're going to get into.
We really didn't talk about that till much later.
All right, we'll come back to that in a moment. I want to bring Lauren in. Lauren, at what age did things get weird for you? And the same kind of question: what were the first manifestations? It's not sort of a classic alien kind of thing that you saw, right?
It began for me as a child with a very deep connection to nature and animals, and understanding that they were sentient beings, and I could hear trees speaking to me, and I could understand animals, their feelings, their thoughts. I could communicate with them. And after that, it evolved more by the age of about 10, where I began to start to see dead people, humans, who would come to me and communicate with me.
People that you knew?
No.
How did you know they were dead?
Well, first I could feel them, and I would sense them. And I would start to feel their emotions and understand their stories and see their experiences of how they died. And then I would feel their sometimes sorrow or confusion. And then I would be able to, in my mind's eye, with my eyes open, be able to see them. I would also be able to, and this is going to sound odd, but I could smell them. And it's not like you would think of smelling a corpse, but there's a distinct smell. And sometimes you can also taste them, because you can taste the air coming across your mouth as you breathe. So it was very clearly people that were not alive.
So, as a youngster, you're having experiences that most people do not have, communication with animals, seeing dead people. Did you tell your mom and dad? Did you share it with anybody else in your family?
No.
Did you know at some level that something was pretty strange and scary?
On some aspect, yes. However, in some way, it was familiar to me, and I had some sort of innate feeling that I was being chosen to communicate with because I understood the process.
At what point in your life did you start seeing beings that we would consider to be the classic alien?
A classic alien. All right. So, classic alien. Well, so first of all, to define classic alien, so an off-world being, I have had extensive contact with angels, and I feel like that's kind of the precursor story that led into my alien education. Do you mind if I start with that?
But you've had a vast array of experiences of what we would all consider to be sort of paranormal or supernatural, in addition to or in conjunction with what we used to call alien abduction kind of experiences, or encounters anyway. Right?
Correct.
All right. All right, Allison and Lauren, let's dive back into some of your biographical details. Allison, back to you for a moment. At what age are you starting to see beings communicating with other kinds of intelligences? I know that you started seeing at some point orbs and then other kinds of beings that would not qualify as the classic Whitley Strieber communion alien, right?
Correct. So I believe, at the age of 3, the bald man was not human, and I was communicating with this person and these other little beings around him. And then at about the age of 9, I started seeing UFOs outside our house. And we would walk in the morning down to the horse farm, and there would be all kinds of weird things flying in the sky that didn't make any sense to me. And then it just kept going on from there. It started at an early age, and it took off like a train. For me.
We heard Lawrence talk about what might be considered psychic type phenomena. Are you having the same kind of things as a youngster?
Correct. So I started realizing that I was getting precognitive messages at about the age of 10. And I would worry about it because I would get messages specific to my family. So, for example, we'd be driving down the road, and the night before I'd had a weird message saying that we were in danger. And so I would look for the danger that I would then see and then ask my dad to pull over. I said, we need to pull over right now because we're in trouble. And he believed me. So that started then, too.
Is there any sort of missing time, classic abduction type scenarios where you or your sisters wake up outside the house, or you're actually gone for a while? Anything like that?
Correct, and that happens. Well, my realization of what was happening started a little bit later, as a late teenager, and I would wake up outside my house, and then in my 20s, it happened a lot, and I couldn't ignore it anymore, and that's when I started trying to find some help. I would find different clothes on when I woke up in the morning. There would be leaves on my shoes. I didn't know how I did that. And then I would sort of have some recall of what happened while I was out on somewhere else. For example, I remember being on a spaceship, and I remember these tall blonde men who looked human, but they weren't quite human. And I don't have any memory of, at that point, of me saying, yes, I'm going to go with you, or no, I'm going to go with you wherever we're going. And that came later also. More realization and more recall.
Are there physical effects of these things that are happening?
Not a lot. I really don't remember having any illness or anything around it at all.
Lauren, back to you. So at your young age, you're having a variety of experiences and phenomena popping up in your life. I asked you the question before the break about classic aliens, and I'm using air quotes around it. You can't see it, but the Whitley Strieber, that kind of a being. You didn't see something like that at a young age, or did you?
The first time I saw a classic alien, my first experience was with a mantis, and I was in my 40s.
Well, tell us about it.
Well, as I was mentioning before, if it's okay with you, I feel that there's a precursor to that which deals with angels.
Yeah. Sure.
And even to back up just a little bit, and it's so funny because in retrospect, I can see how the universe had my education set out for me in a particular sequence. But after the experience with dead people and understanding all of that and being able to assist people that were alive to work through some of their pain and grief with that, as I became older into my 20s and 30s, I started to have experience with dark entities. And oh my gosh, every house I lived in, there was something going on. I couldn't go out in public without picking up like a hitchhiker where, you might drive by a cemetery and there's some dark energy there that's not human, or, in any kind of abandoned places or any type of situation, because there's energies all around us for different reasons and in different places. And that was an interesting education in and of itself. after, about my 20s and my 30s of having that type of experience and gaining a lot of knowledge about that on my own, the universe seemed to shift to angels. And my first experience with angels, there was an event one day in my home where I was innocently just sitting at my desk, writing bills, actually, and I was inclined to look up. And at the time, I was living in a home that a normal room had like 10-foot ceilings. And so in the front of the house, there was 2 rooms connected, a formal living room and a dining room that was open and did not have a story above it. So the roof peaked and the height was approximately, 25 feet in that room. And that particular day I was writing bills and I looked up and I saw a rectangle suspended in my living room. And it was a rectangle of light. It reminded me of like a picture frame without a picture in it. And the perimeter was glowing, beautiful, and what would be where the picture is, but I could see through to the wall. But there were these twinkles appearing, and they started to twinkle, and it was just beautiful. And as I was watching this visual show, I realized that I was beginning to experience that visual effect as music inside of my body. And I realized I was being communicated with. And kind of as soon as I had that logical connection with my thinking mind, it went away. Just a few days later, which happened to be March 20th of that year, which was 2006, at the time, I did not realize that it was the spring equinox because at that time, those things had no meaning to me. I had no reference point. But again, in retrospect, I look back and it was the spring equinox that day. And in this area that I'm talking about, I walked into that area and there was an enormous angel suspended in the room, and it took up the majority of space in the room from, floor to ceiling. It was suspended above the floor, but, from left to right and top to bottom, it was just enormous. And it was, it reminded me of a Christmas ornament. The body was a triangle. The head was a circle with no facial features. The wings were enormous and gorgeous, and they had rows of feathers, and they looked like classic wings, classic feathers. And at the bottom of what me looking at would be the left-hand side of the bottom triangle, the foot of the angel, there was a cube. And the angel itself was 2-dimensional, but the cube was 3-dimensional. And all of it was the same color of white. And it was a color of white that just does not exist here. In fact, it's still to this day hard to put words on to describe what that color of white light really actually looked like. But it was a gorgeous color of white light. After I had, processed what I was seeing and, looking at all of this, something began to happen. And in the center of the triangle, which would, equate to one's solar plexus, and in the center of the cube, those 2 areas opened up like an aperture of a camera, and a different color of white light began to flow out of both of those areas and merged into one river of light and came towards me. And that white light, as I say, was a different color of white light, and it's also it had motion to it. And I refer to it as like a living light or a liquid light. And the effect, it was having an effect on the room as well. But when you would look at this stream of light, it really very much reminded me of when you're like in a room and there's a swimming pool nearby and like a pool.
Shimmering kind of. Yeah. So did anybody else see any of this? Anyone else there to see it?
Actually, yes, and yes, there was someone else, and that's the person that called me into the room to see it. It was my husband, and thank you for saying that. I was going to try to not talk about that, but since we're here, I'll mention it.
Oh, he'll forgive you. That's all right.
Yeah. So prior to this time, a lot of things were happening with me. I was receiving a lot of unsolicited downloads. I was trying to get my sea legs because a lot of things were happening to me that I did not understand. And the only person I could feel like I could share this information with was my husband. And so I was telling him, oh my God, I'm seeing all these things. I'm understanding. I'm seeing the beginning of the universe, and these cycles of life, and I'm getting all this information. He literally thought I was just absolutely, out of my mind, and I'm sure he felt skeptical and questioned my sanity, and that was difficult for me because I don't think he meant to be that way, but that's what was my experience, and telling him that it was just difficult for him to process that, I'm sure.
I'll tell you what,
So,
we'll shift back. I want to include both of you in the conversation, so I want to go back to Allison. When we come back to you, I want to hear how it leads up to the mantis creature, because I'm interested in mantises. Allison, you had some fairly dramatic experiences when you lived in Munich, going to college.
Correct.
And you're in a dorm with 4 other women, and they are able to verify at least parts of this being that you had in your room, right?
Correct. So I woke up it was a fall morning, and I lived at one end of the dorm room. We had really big apartment homes, and I had my own room, and I went to bed, and I had vague memories when I woke up of someone being in my dorm room. And I remember this person asking me that we need to go now, let's go, will you please go? And it was a blonde man, not that tall, and he was trying to convince me that I needed to go with him. And I'm a very passive person. It takes a lot to put me on the defensive. And when I woke up, my entire room had been tossed. The door to my room was open, and the door to the outside was open, and I was wearing different clothes. And I thought, something's happened. I'm not sure what it is. And later in the day, 2 of my roommates started to ask me about who the blonde man was. And I said, well, what do you know about him? And then they would I would get this blank stare, and then they would say, but there was a blonde man here. And I would say, well, do you remember his name? We spent a couple months trying to figure out who he was. He then came at different times and talked to my roommates, which they could not tell me what he said. But that was the beginning of my interactions with the tall Nordic.
You think you've had experiences with non-humans in public in other instances, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
You want to share any of those?
Sure. So I had one experience on a train track in outside of Munich, where I was coming up. In Germany, the train tracks, you walk below and then you walk to the top of the train tracks. And I remember walking and thinking the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I sensed something was terribly wrong. And I started walking up the stairs, and I could see this man at the top of the platform. He did not look human. There was something really weird about him, and he was completely focused on me. So I immediately turned around and ran down to three flights of staircases farther. I got up to the top, and as the train was coming in, I felt something on my cheek. And I turned my head, and he was right there, and he wasn't speaking, but I could hear him speak. And he was talking to me, and he had a message, and he said, now is the beginning of the road to hell. And then I looked down the train track, and I got onto the train as fast as I could, and I found some Americans that I could feel safe with. And I said, did you see that guy? And they all admitted they saw him, and they were all talking about him because he looked very, very evil to them in a kind of a religious context. But they all kind of recognized that something was really different about this guy. And that's one. And then there was one where I had at work, where I worked in a building where I had to go through several security checks to even get to where I worked. And each one of those would have been a separate approval through a management train. And so I got into my work, and I facilitated a meeting, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I sensed something alien, which at this point, this was like 20 years later, and I had several people that I'd had these experiences with, and I kind of knew how I reacted to when I had sensed something non-human. So I walked forward, and it was someone who was very tall, very pale, had a very bad curly wig on, and was just standing there staring at me, and would have had to have permission to get into this facility. And this was in aerospace. So I was really concerned because now I'm having all these experiences in my personal life, and now here it is at my work. So I ran around this guy, and I got to my email to check to see if I could find a picture through an org chart to see if he had weird eyes like what I was looking at, and he didn't. The picture was too small. But then for 6 weeks, he would appear in meetings that I was facilitating with people and that didn't make any sense to me, because these people were the same people we had week after week after week. Nobody outside of these rooms should have been allowed in. These were opaque windows and a lockdown room. Everything was very, very, very fixed. And the management who would come in with him would say, instead of talking about the issues that we were working, they would say, no, we don't know. That's not how you act in this situation. This is how you act in this situation. And they would say really strange stuff about how he was interacting with us as opposed to what we were really doing in these meetings. And again, this went on for 6 weeks, and he never made eye contact with me. But I do feel that he sensed something within me, which is how he found me in the building. And it seems to be a theme in my life that people do sense that I may be having interactions with aliens or UFOs.
Allison and Lauren, both of you seem pretty comfortable in speaking about these very unusual experiences. I want to talk about what it's been like to come out, because I'm sure there have been some bumps, some peaks and valleys along the way, and it hasn't been as easy to talk about it with people, including UFO organizations, therapists who deal with this kind of stuff, PTSD counselors, things of that sort. We're rocking and rolling with Allison and Lauren, who've been sharing some fairly wild and intimate details about an extraordinary lives that they've led. You know, both of you, by the way, thanks for being here. I know you're not professional speakers. You're not out on the circuit. You're not writing books. I'm not sure that you've ever done interviews about this before, a radio interview, but appreciate it. And I know that it must be difficult to go ahead and bare your souls on this. You know, many, if not most of us, have sort of a generic idea about what we used to call alien abductions, close encounters, what those experiences are like, all the classic ingredients that have been shared with us in books and movies and TV shows. And the assumption is that these are space aliens from other planets traveling here in their saucers or discs or Tic Tacs or cigars, and they interact with us, take us on board, perform invasive exams and procedures, and then drop us back in the pond like a fisherman who hooked a fish and then returned it. But when you speak with people like Allison and Lauren, experiencers, contactees, it becomes pretty clear that the story of their lives is way more complicated, scarier, stranger than that core stories that we all think we know. What's it like to live with these kind of secrets? At what point do you decide to come forward and come out and tell someone? And do you worry that people think you're going bonkers, or that you worry that you're going bonkers? These experiences could certainly drive some people over the edge, and to talk about it openly invites ostracism, questions about their sanity, loss of jobs or loved ones or status, personal attacks. Lauren Nelder, I promised we'd come back and hear the story about the mantis encounter. Now that we've heard about this cornucopia, this zoo of different entities that you've encountered, can you share with us when you encountered this mantis and can you describe that moment and what you made of it?
Sure. Thanks, George. So I had been teaching at a local university in Washington, and I was teaching a program in energy medicine. And I started to get a lot of students. And when I seemed to maybe get a little momentum and a little popularity, I was abducted by I don't know who. I woke up when I went to bed, and the next moment I was aware I was being taken down a hallway, and I was definitely in my physical body. My physical body had been taken, and my feet were not touching the floor. I was in a corridor. I had what I do feel were two humans, one on each side of me, and somehow they were transporting me down the hallway without me touching the floor. Our shoulders were all touching. And I sensed they were human. And they took me at the end of this hallway. These doors slid open, and I was in a white room with some, control panels and instruments along the perimeter of the room, and it was a circular room. And there was another set of double doors, or a large door that had a seam in it on the left. And I was set down on the ground and standing on my feet, and the doors opened, and a large white egg floated into the room and rotated in front of me, and there was a mantis seated in it. And the mantis came out of the chair and approached me, and it felt threatening, and I sensed it was female. And she spoke to me. She vocalized words to me in English, and she said, "Tell me what you know." And I was absolutely stunned. And so again, she repeated, "Tell me what you know." Huh. And I started processing in my mind, what is this about, right? Because I really feel that this was had to do with the knowledge that I had received from angels. Angels had directed me, eventually they directed me to point me to learning about studying ancient civilizations, which led me to Alberto Villoldo and the Light Body School of the Four Winds Society. So I learned shamanic energy medicine, which was in alignment with what angels were teaching me about moving energy and healing people and awakening humans to their potential of what you really are and your capabilities. So when I was teaching these students, I really feel that the mantis came to me and wanted to know what I knew, to what extent did I know. And I did not want to answer her, and she became very aggressive and told me that she was going to find out what I knew, whether I was going to freely tell her or not. And at that point, I became confrontational, and I basically said, "Bring it." And she reached around and punctured my spinal column at the base of my neck, and I'm assuming she extracted what she wanted to know about me. And after that, I remember waking up in my bed screaming. It was extremely frightening, and I felt myself, settling into the bed. And I woke up and I ran into the bathroom and I was screaming. My husband was in the room, and I'm like, look at my neck. Is there something on my neck? And he said, yes, you have a mark on your neck. Did you get bitten by something? So of course he probably assumed I got bitten by a spider in my sleep and was having a bad dream. But when I explained to him my experience, I believe he believed me at that point, because he'd had too many experiences with me, and he eventually believed me and became a trusted person I could speak to about my experiences. So that was my mantis story.
That's a good one. Allison, have you had an experience sort of as intrusive as that?
So my story is a little bit different than that. I was taken to this planet where I spent some time. I know that sounds crazy. All this stuff sounds crazy. But I can tell you that it happened over and over and over again, and I felt like I was part of a family. But the thing that really scares me, George, are the my lab experiences where I believe, after I would have these alien experiences, I was also taken by or some other agency. And those were really, really scary to me and very, very negative.
Are you thinking that the military is working in conjunction with them, or that they are studying people who are taken by the others, whoever the others are?
Yeah, I don't think they're working in conjunction with them. I think this is, this person may potentially have something that the military might want. So in my case, I can give you a specific example. When you're an experiencer, sometimes you sort of wake up and you're in this other place. And it's like you don't remember anything before or anything after, but you're awake and so in this case, I felt like I was paralyzed. And I was on this little tram, and there was another person next to me on this little tram, and he was begging me to not tell these people whatever this was that he was upset about. He says, "Don't tell them. Whatever you do not tell these people anything." And he was screaming and he was crying. And then the tram started to move, and we went around a hill, and I could see people in uniform, and they threatened this person to harm this person. And then whatever I told them satisfied them. All I remember is trying to manipulate air, and that's all. And then that was all I remembered. But every time I had a negative experience like that, it seemed to be human related.
So both of you have had this rich tapestry of strange experiences, scary experiences. I wanted to know, we'll get into some more details in a bit and how you process it all, what it means, but I wanted to know how you feel about the current UFO wave, this wave of public interest, media interest, congressional interest, and it's all about government secrets, secret files, secret videos that can't be released. Do you feel left out? And does it seem like, at least as far as the public is concerned, abductions have stopped? This isn't happening anymore. The whole focus is on D.C. and the Pentagon. Allison, you first, and then Lauren.
Okay, so I do not believe this phenomenon is over by any stretch of the imagination. I work with a lot of people. As of yesterday, I had a person that I was with come to me and say, I'm having all these experiences, and I don't know what to do. And this is happening over and over again. And these folks have nobody to talk to. There really isn't a good support system out there right now where people can even agree to definitions of the same. A lot of people don't understand that paranormal is a big part of this. And I appreciate that there's movement to finding out what UFOs are, but I think the UFOs are here for the experiencers as opposed to being lights in the sky that people are looking at. I think there's a much bigger picture.
Meaning your up close and personal experiences is the core to this, not things that are flying around in the sky and messing around over military bases.
Correct.
Lauren, same kind of question to you. Have you felt left out based on your experiences where all the public focus seems to be over the last couple of years?
So I would agree with what Allie has said. In my experience, when I was having students, doing a lot of sessions, teaching, everybody, well, not everybody, but most everybody had a story, and they were compelled to come learn because they were having experiences. And I still do speak with people and consult, and I agree with Allison completely. And do I personally feel left out? I can't feel left out because I've never taken any steps to publicize myself, except for tonight. And I would really like, I feel that people could benefit from what people like myself know and what Allison knows and people like us, because we are on the front lines. We are experiencing these things directly. And I'm not trying to discredit or discount what other people see, and certainly not, to insult the military, but, seeing and tracking UFOs and documenting them is different from experiencing and communicating with the beings that are operating them. whether from within them or they're under intelligent control from another location.
I'd like to hear about how you've been treated by UFO organizations. And I ask it in this context is for, I've not been around forever, but I've been around for a while. And I know in reading about the early days of the UFO world when, they were fine with talking about nuts and bolts craft, saucers out in the skies. And they got uncomfortable when people started talking about there were beings inside those saucers. And there was a great deal of reluctance, I think, when Bud Hopkins and Whitley Strieber came out with these tales of alien abductions. Finally, reluctantly, I think, abductees, contactees, now experiencers were allowed into the tent to talk about what had happened to them. And now, it's a regular feature at UFO conferences where there are separate sessions where everybody gets together and shares stories. But in general, Allison, you first, how have you been treated by, say, MUFON or some of the other organizations or the people who are so-called experts on this stuff?
As an experiencer, when I first started trying to find answers, I really thought there'd be a group of people that's all they did. There was a therapist, and then we would, be around the room and get some help, and that did not happen. So I had to reach out to groups that weren't, I don't feel, set up for people like me, and I was rejected. And when you talk to an investigator from whatever organization, they want to figure out if you're, if you're a real person and that these are real events, and you can't prove anything because there's no definitions. We can't even define what paranormal is. And I think at the beginning we felt like the fringe. And it's getting a little more mainstream, but it still feels like when you go to these conferences, it feels like entertainment. And I worry about people that go thinking they're going to get help, and they're not finding it because they're not being taken seriously.
Lauren, same kind of question to you. I mean, a lot of the experiences you've shared with us here fall way outside the realm of what is considered ufology. And I wanted to know how you've interacted with any of these organizations, if at all. And I asked that in this context. I had seen a letter that somebody shared with me. I haven't made it public, but it was sent out by the head of investigations for MUFON, I think within the last year, to all the state directors, and it basically said, we're not interested in woo anymore, okay? So all we're interested in is UFOs, flying saucer, investigating unknown aircraft in the skies. That's our job, and not this strange stuff, not the paranormal. And that would seem to exclude a lot of what you're sharing. I don't know whether you care about MUFON or not, but that certainly is not an encouraging kind of a message to send out to people like yourself who've had experiences that go way beyond just UFOs.
All right, thank you. So I have had an experience with MUFON. And once again, when I was living in Washington, I had an extremely profound encounter with multiple spacecraft in the sky over North Seattle. I lived in Kirkland at the time, right on the shore of Lake Washington. And there was a very intense experience that I encountered one evening where there were multiple crafts in the sky. At one point, they appeared as saucers, and I had a really good look at them. And I'm very analytical and detailed, and I take things in very detailed. I don't have credentials. I'm not a pilot. I'm not in the military. I'm not a scientist, but I'm very observant. And I had binoculars on, and, this saucer, one of the saucers, usually they turn on a horizontal plane just instantly. But at one point, this one banked. And when it banked slowly right in front of my eyes with binoculars up close and personal, it literally morphed into a black triangle. And then it, long story short, came across the lake. I was thinking I wish it would come closer, and it did. I don't know if the people inside heard my thoughts. It came across the lake and took position up in front of my house, and it was enormous. And later in the evening, after we had gone to bed, because there was somebody else in the house that had experienced that with me, And it was not my husband. It was my daughter. And at the time, she was 11. And later on in that evening, we were visited by Grays. And that was a whole interesting thing. But to answer your question, that experience sent me in a deep, deep thought for nearly a year. And I had a lot of realizations because of it. Even though I had had all these other, myriad experiences for all these years prior, this one was profound. And I finally vowed that I would do a write-up and tell somebody. And I found MUFON. That's how I found MUFON. And I did a beautiful write-up. And when I did a beautiful and very detailed writing about that and wasn't expecting to hear back anything, honestly. And within a few moments, my phone rang, and I was speaking to somebody that immediately posed the question in this tone of voice, "Who do you work for?" And I was so shocked. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "This is too good. This write-up's too good. Are you making this up?" This person was very skeptical and questioned me heavily about my write-up. And I felt a bit victimized because I was sharing something very profound, and I thought that that's what the organization wanted to hear about. But it seemed like I was just another number, and the details didn't matter, and that's what it felt like. However, that's all I'll say. However, I will say I want to clarify some things. One thing I would like to say is that there are numerous species that inhabit this planet and or visit this planet. And the ones that have inhabited this planet have always inhabited this planet. And not all species are malevolent. There are many that are benevolent and that support us and have an interest in our advancement. And I even feel that within a species, you have malevolent and benevolent individuals. So it's complicated.
Just like us.
Yeah.
Just like us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I feel that the bigger picture is our advancement or the blocking of it. And that's really where the story lies. And so when you're able to communicate with these beings, and you can either do that vocally because you have them in front of you, or you can do that telepathically because they're communicating with you telepathically, and you can understand them, then why wouldn't people listen? And in all fairness, I've, for the most part, been kind of hidden. I've been a little bit public here and there, but I've made distinct choices to not be public until tonight.
Right. Well, I appreciate both of you coming forward and sharing your stories with us tonight. I know it takes courage to do that, and I hope it's a positive experience. All right, Lauren Nalder and Allison, thank you both for coming here and sharing with us. I know it took courage to do this, and that you don't do this stuff all the time, and I can't thank you enough. I know that our listeners got a lot out of it. And hope you'll both stay in touch with us.
The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.